I remember that night like it never really ended, like part of me is still standing under that cold red glow of the Ranger Tower emergency light. It was late fall, close to midnight, and the park was empty in the way only deep forests can be. Where silence doesn't feel peaceful, it feels wrong. The air smelled like wet pine and old dirt, the kind of smell that makes you think the ground is holding secrets no one should dig up. I was halfway through my shift at a remote national park station, covering for another ranger who had called in sick. I didn't mind. I'd spent years here. I knew every trail, every lookout point, every sound the woods made when they were alive and calm. But that night, the forest sounded different. The wind wasn't moving the trees. The ground was too quiet. Even the insects had gone still. And when a forest goes silent, something is there that shouldn't be. I'd been drinking my third cup of stale station coffee, trying to shake off the tiredness creeping in, when the radio crackled with weak static. No voice, just a faint breath-like hiss pushing through the frequency, rising and falling like someone was trying to speak but wasn't close enough. I adjusted the dial, thinking maybe someone on a nearby frequency was bleeding into ours, but then I heard something that made my stomach twist. My own name, said softly, like someone was whispering it right next to the speaker. I froze. Nobody else was scheduled in this part of the park. No patrol units, no campers, no staff. The protocol said I should respond. Common sense said not to. I stared at the radio for a long few seconds, heart pounding, and the silence that followed felt heavy, as if the whole building was listening with me. I kept telling myself it was interference, just some strange overlap from another channel, but the longer I sat there, the more the room felt like it was shrinking around me. I finally reached for the radio, planning to switch it off for a moment, when the emergency phone on the wall rang. That phone never rings unless someone is in real trouble. I stepped over and picked it up, expecting a panicked hiker or maybe a false alarm. But there was no voice, just the same faint breathing I'd heard on the radio. Slow, steady, almost careful. I felt my fingers tighten around the receiver. I kept listening, waiting for words, but the breathing stayed calm, like the person on the other end knew exactly what they were doing. When I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking. I told myself I needed fresh air before I overthought this into something unreal. I stepped outside, the cold hitting my face like a slap. The trees stood tall and still, lined up like a crowd staring in my direction. The emergency light above the door flickered, buzzing softly. I took a couple of steps off the porch, trying to breathe normally, when I noticed something that hadn't been there earlier. The cabin door to the gear shed was slightly open. Only rangers had keys to that shed, and I was the only ranger within miles. I approached slowly, feeling every crunch of dead leaves under my boots. The door wasn't wide open, just cracked enough for a strip of darkness to spill out. I pushed it with my forearm, ready to find maybe an animal that forced its way in. But nothing moved. Everything inside looked untouched. The ropes, the flare kits, the emergency packs, lined up exactly how I left them hours before. I closed the door and locked it, but my mind wouldn't let it go. Either I had forgotten to secure it, or someone else had. Back inside the station, the air felt heavier than before. I kept glancing at the radio, as if it might speak again. I tried to distract myself with paperwork, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows. The glass reflected the room, just enough to make it hard to tell if someone was standing outside. I shifted my chair, so I wouldn't be sitting directly across from one. I pulled out the logbook, flipping through the pages to write down the phone incident, but something stopped me cold. On the page for that date, clean earlier that evening, someone had already written a note in small, tense handwriting. Stop looking for me. My chest tightened. I checked the front door again. Locked. All windows shut. Nobody had passed me. But someone had been close enough to write in that book, close enough to hear me breathe in the quiet, and close enough to make me feel like I wasn't alone at all. I tried to stay rational, but the panic was rising so fast I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I stood in the middle of the ranger station, every light on, staring at the logbook like it might suddenly explain itself. The room was quiet, too quiet, until the radio crackled again, a soft scraping sound like something dragging across a microphone. I forced myself to approach it, every step heavier than the last. I leaned down, and before I could touch the button, a voice came through. Not a whisper this time. A voice I recognized, tight and strained, saying my name in the exact tone someone uses when they are standing right behind you. I turned so fast my vision blurred. No one was there. But I heard something, floorboards creaking in the hallway that led to the sleeping quarters. That hallway should have been empty. I reached for the flashlight on my belt, my hand almost slipping from sweat, and slowly walked toward the sound. The beam of light shook across the walls, making shadows jump and twist. Another creak, and another. Whoever it was wasn't hurrying. They were walking slowly, deliberately, like they wanted me to hear every step. I stopped outside the door to the bunk room, and my breath caught. The door was barely cracked open. Just like the shed. I pushed slowly, the hinges whining in the silence. The flashlight beam swept across the empty beds, until it stopped on the far wall. Someone had written on it, in the same tense handwriting from the logbook. I said, "Stop looking for me." Before I could react, something crashed behind me, papers and binders hitting the floor of the main room. I spun and stepped out quickly, the flashlight lifted like a weapon. The whole station looked torn through. Chairs knocked over, drawers open, maps littering the floor. And right in the middle of the room were wet footprints leading toward the front door. Bare footprints. Humans. Fresh. As if someone had been standing inches away from me while I was reading that note. When I followed the prints to the door, I saw the final thing that made my stomach drop. The lock wasn't broken, forced, or picked. I locked the door again with shaking hands. It was undone from the inside, but it felt pointless. Whoever had been inside didn't break in. They walked right through as if they belonged there. I grabbed the station phone and called the main dispatch. My voice came out thin and broken, and I hated how terrified I sounded, but I couldn't help it. I told them I had an intruder on site, possibly armed, possibly dangerous. They said units were being sent, but I knew how long those roads were. Even with sirens and speed, I was alone for at least 40 minutes. I backed myself into a corner where I could see every door and window. I sat with my flashlight gripped so tight my wrist hurt. The station had gone quiet again. No footsteps, no breathing, no dragging sounds. Just the hum of fluorescent lights. That somehow made it worse, like the forest and the building were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. When backup finally arrived, I almost collapsed from relief. 2 rangers swept the building, weapons drawn, voices steady and calm in a way mine wasn't. They found nothing. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. And when I tried to show them the writing on the wall in the bunk room, it wasn't there anymore. Just clean paint, like it had never been touched. The logbook, though, still had that message on the page. At least I wasn't imagining everything. One of the rangers stared at it for a long time and shut the book without a word. Nobody said I'd done anything wrong, but the look in their eyes told me everything. They thought I was exhausted, stressed, maybe losing it a little. But I know what I saw. I know someone was there with me in that building. And I know they didn't want to be found. I didn't quit the job right away. That's the part that still bothers me. Someone walked through a locked building while I was inside, wrote messages meant only for me, and slipped out like they had all the time in the world. And I convinced myself to finish the shift. Maybe it was duty. Maybe it was denial. Maybe I just didn't want to admit how close I'd come to something I couldn't explain. But after that night, nothing in the forest ever felt the same. Every cracked branch, every radio hiss, every shift in the wind made me turn my head too fast. I started checking locks twice, then 3 times. I slept with the lights on at the station for months. I told myself I was being careful, but really, I was just scared of closing my eyes. What everyone else saw was a ranger who got jumpy after a long shift. What I knew was harder to live with. Somebody had been hiding in those woods. Someone who didn't want to be found. Someone who walked and breathed and opened doors while I was right there, and I still never saw their face. That's what keeps me awake, not the fear of what happened, but the fear of what I never learned. Sometimes I think about the note in the logbook. I still have photos of it, just to remind myself it was real. Stop looking for me. I wasn't looking for anyone that night, but I guess it didn't matter. Someone out there believed I was getting too close. And every now and then, when the radio crackles late at night, I wonder if they ever came back. And if someone else is listening alone in a dark station, trying not to breathe too loud. I still think about the second week of August, the one that made me realize the forest doesn't need monsters to be terrifying. People are enough. I was covering a late shift at an old ranger outpost near the northern hiking loop, a place that didn't see much traffic anymore. Most hikers avoided that part of the park because the trails were long, narrow, and unsettlingly quiet. The trees grew so closely together that the canopy blocked out half the daylight, and at night the forest felt like one long, black tunnel that swallowed sound. Even the air tasted stale, like it hadn't moved in years. The shift had been normal at first. A few routine check-ins, a weather radio update, and some paperwork. Nothing stressful. Nothing strange. Around 10:20 p.m., I got a notice over the park system that a solo hiker named David had not checked in at the next waypoint. He'd been out since early afternoon, and according to his hike plan, he should have been at the northern shelter an hour earlier. I tried contacting him on the emergency frequency, but all I heard was static, thin, distant, fading in and out, almost like a weak heartbeat on a monitor. It wasn't unusual to lose signal out there. The mountains were tall, and the trees were dense. But something about that static made me uneasy, like it was moving, shifting, reacting. I called in a preliminary search dispatch. They told me backup would take at least an hour. I didn't like the idea of waiting, not with someone possibly injured in the woods. Against policy, I geared up and headed out alone, telling myself I'd only go as far as the first fork in the trail. The air outside felt unnaturally still. No wind, no insects, just the soft crunch of my boots on the dirt path. And somewhere deep in the darkness ahead, the static from the radio hissed again, this time with a low voice buried under it, saying something I couldn't quite make out. The sound didn't feel like interference. It felt intentional. The trail narrowed the farther I walked, twisting uphill between the trees like a path carved for someone who didn't want to be followed. I kept calling David's name every few minutes, but the woods gave nothing back, not even an echo. That silence weighed on me more than any loud noise could have. In the forest, silence isn't absent. Silence means something is listening. About 15 minutes in, my radio crackled again. The same faint static, but this time I heard a voice, short, clipped, and shaky. Help! I froze mid-step. The voice was weak, but definitely human. My first thought was relief, he was alive. But something about the tone bothered me. People in distress usually sound desperate, panicked, louder than they mean to be. This voice sounded controlled. Too controlled. Like someone was whispering into the mic, trying not to be overheard. David, if you can hear me, speak again, I said, keeping my voice steady. Nothing. Just the soft whisper of the radio static and the faint rustling of trees that shouldn't have been moving in windless air. I pushed on, scanning the beam of my flashlight along the trail. That's when I found the first sign something wasn't right. A flare stick lying on the ground, unlit, but cracked open as if someone had tried to activate it and failed. It wasn't dropped casually. It was placed carefully in the center of the path. I knelt beside it, checking for footprints or drag marks. There were none. Not a single disturbed leaf. It was like someone had stood perfectly still, set the flare down, then vanished into thin air without moving the ground. My heartbeat picked up. I tried calling dispatch again for an update, but the radio made a sharp popping sound and went dead silent. Not static. Not breakup. Just off. I flipped through channels, checked the antenna, tapped the side of the unit. Nothing. It was like someone cut the signal completely. I had to make a choice, return to the outpost and wait for backup, or keep moving deeper into the forest. I should have turned around. Any sane person would have. But something was pulling me forward, not curiosity, not duty, something closer to dread. Like whatever was happening, it wasn't finished yet, and I had already stepped too far in to pretend otherwise. When I reached the next fork in the trail, I spotted a second flare lying in the dirt. This one was lightly scuffed, as if it had been kicked or dropped in a hurry. Beside it, on a tree trunk, I saw something carved into the bark, for deep slash marks almost perfectly parallel. Not an animal claw. Straight, even deliberate. Markings made by someone who wanted them large enough to see in moonlight. And for the first time, I wondered if David was alone out here. I followed the slash marks, moving slower now, every nerve screaming that I should stop. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees leaning, shadows thickening, twisting in shapes that made my stomach churn. I heard something then, a snapping branch behind me, soft, deliberate, like someone testing whether I was paying attention. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness, but nothing moved. Just the trail, empty, and that silence that felt like it was pressing against my skull. Then I heard it again, a voice, this time clear, but whispering only a single word. Stop. My throat went dry. I wanted to call back, to ask who was there, but the words wouldn't come. The forest had swallowed my voice along with the night. I stepped carefully, heart hammering, until I reached a small clearing where the moonlight broke through. That's when I saw him. David, or what it looked like. He was crouched behind a fallen log, head down, hands trembling. Relief hit me, but it dissolved immediately when I noticed the hands. Too small to be his size, too pale, like someone had been hiding far too long. And his eyes, or at least, I thought they were eyes at first. They didn't move naturally. Something about them didn't belong to a living person. A sudden crash came from the opposite side of the clearing. I turned sharply, swinging the flashlight. Movement, just shadows at first, then a figure stepping out from between the trees. Tall, lean, silent. They didn't run, didn't speak, just watched me. The air felt thicker, my lungs burning, as if I couldn't take a full breath. Every step I took toward the figure, it mirrored, keeping perfect distance, unblinking. I realized then that this wasn't random trespassing. It had been orchestrated. Someone had led me here, had let me see the flares, the marks, the David crouched on the ground, all to pull me deeper into their control. The radio crackled again, sharp and loud, and my blood ran cold. The voice hissed through the static. Too far now. I froze. The forest felt alive around me, but it wasn't nature. It was him, or them, shaping it to keep me trapped. And just like that, David, or the figure I had mistaken for him, stood slowly, unnaturally tall, and stepped toward me, silent but deliberate. My hands shook. I realized I was no longer searching for a lost hiker. I was being hunted. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over roots as I tried to keep both figures in sight. But when I turned the flashlight back toward David, the space where he'd been was empty. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. Just the log and the impression of where someone had been crouching. My pulse was so loud I could barely hear anything else. I forced myself to breathe, then grabbed the radio again, even though I knew it was pointless. But this time, instead of static, I heard distant voices, dispatch, calling my name over and over. The trail, the signal had returned. I didn't want to see if the tall figure followed. I didn't want confirmation that I hadn't imagined it. Branches struck my arms and face, roots caught at my boots, but I kept running until the forest finally gave way to open dirt roads. And there, coming up the road fast, were two rangers in a patrol truck. I waved wildly, hand shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. When they reached me, I could barely get the words out. They sat me in the truck and drove back to the outpost, calling in a larger search team for David. Hours later, after the woods were scoured in daylight, they found him, 2 miles off trail, lying face down by a ravine. Alive barely. Hypothermic, delirious, and unable to explain how he'd gotten there or why his radio had broadcast at all. He had no memory of leaving the trail. He kept repeating the same sentence over and over. I wasn't alone out there. I wasn't alone. And no matter how much I tried, I couldn't argue with him. They wrote the report in the simplest way possible. Hiker disoriented, ranger located him, medical evacuation successful. Clean, neat, nothing unusual. That's the way these things have to be on paper. But inside, something cracked. I had always believed the forest was indifferent, dangerous, yes, but not personal. That night changed it. I realized some people disappear in the woods, not because they get lost, but because something finds them first. Something human, something patient, something that knows how to move without leaving the ground disturbed. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been manipulated, not just followed, but guided step by step into the clearing where I was meant to see exactly what I saw. I still don't know if the tall figure was real, or if my mind was filling in the blanks the dark refused to show. Maybe the marks on the tree were nothing. Maybe David's voice on the radio was just lucky reception. But deep down, I don't believe those explanations. Some things don't come from panic. They come from witnessing something you were never meant to notice. Sometimes late at night, when the radio buzzes with static for no reason, I catch myself holding my breath, waiting to hear that voice again. And I try not to think about how easily I was led off the trail that night. Because if someone could guide me into the dark that smoothly, it means they had done it before, and I'm terrified they'll do it again. I still remember the sound more than anything, the slow, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the forest long after the sun went down. It was early spring, still cold enough that the ground kept your boots damp, and the smell of thawing soil hung thick in the air. I was stationed at a ranger cabin deep in the western part of the park, an area only accessible by an old service road that was barely drivable even in good weather. Most rangers hated shifts out there, but I liked the quiet. At least, I used to. On my second night, we received a call from Wildlife Control saying a local resident had reported someone wandering near the tree line, barefoot and moving strangely. It sounded more like a vagrant than a threat, but the caller was shaken enough that protocol required a check. I waited for the rain to ease, grabbed my gear, and headed out alone. The sky was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, and the forest looked like a wall of shifting shadows. About half a mile in, I began noticing odd things. twigs stacked neatly on the trail, lined up by size, almost like someone had been sorting them. A small pile of stones sat in the center of the path, arranged into a perfect circle. These weren't natural. Someone had placed them there. Recently. I told myself it was just kids messing around, but the thought didn't settle. Something about the neatness bothered me. No random wanderer took the time to lay out stones in perfect shape. Not in the cold, not in the dark. Then, behind me, the tapping started. Slow, steady, spaced out. I turned, shining my flashlight into the trees, but the sound stopped immediately. I stood still, listening hard, lungs held tight. And just when the silence stretched too long, the tapping returned. This time closer, like whatever was making it had moved while I stood completely still. And I knew then, I wasn't alone on that trail. I tried calling out, nothing aggressive, just a simple announcement that a park ranger was on duty and approaching. Usually that's enough to scare off trespassers, or at least get someone to respond. But the only reply I got was the soft drip of rain falling through the branches. The tapping had stopped again, but the silence felt heavier now, like the forest was concentrating on me. I kept walking slower, scanning both sides of the trail. My flashlight reflected off the wet bark of pines and the dark moss below them, but nothing moved. The path curved left, and as I rounded it, I found something that made my skin crawl. A second circle of stones, identical to the one before, except this one sat dead center on a wooden board. A board with a rusty nail hammered through the middle. It looked old, weathered, but placed carefully. Like someone was constructing something piece by piece, trail marker by trail marker. I snapped a picture for documentation, but my hand was shaking so hard the shot blurred. I lowered the camera and swallowed the uneasy feeling building in my throat. That's when the radio on my chest clicked. No voice, no static, just a short click, like someone had pressed the talk button for a second before letting go. I froze. Only rangers can access this channel. We don't give out its frequency. Dispatch copy? I said softly. No response. Another click. My mouth went dry. Someone was signaling me. A faint rustling came from the right side of the trail, followed by that tapping again. But this time faster, irregular, almost frantic. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, and for a split second, I caught movement. A pale shape behind a tree, low to the ground, gone before the light could lock onto it. Too quick for a drunk wanderer. Too deliberate for an animal. I took a step back, and that's when I saw the footprint in the mud. Bare. Humans. Small. Toes splayed wide like they had been walking without shoes for a long time. The print was fresh, the edges sharp. I could feel my pulse in my throat, that primal warning that told me I wasn't just looking for someone. I was being lured. The tapping stopped again, but a new sound replaced it, quiet breathing. Slow, irregular, coming from the trees just off the trail. I couldn't see anything, but I felt eyes on me. The kind of stare that wasn't just watching, but studying, deciding. A sudden crack of a stick snapped behind me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my grip. But there was nothing, just the trail disappearing into deeper darkness. I realized then that whoever was out there didn't care about hiding their presence. They wanted me to know they were there. They wanted me to follow. And like an idiot, I did. The trail dipped into a shallow ravine, and the air grew colder, thick with the smell of wet soil. My boots slipped once on the mud, and the radio clicked again, twice this time. A code. A pattern. Someone was telling me they knew exactly where I was. I should have turned back. I should have waited for backup. But there is a moment in every search where logic steps aside and instinct takes over, and mine pushed me forward, deeper into that suffocating dark. The tapping returned, now coming from below the ravine, rhythm broken, frantic, like someone banging wood against stone in warning. I crouched low, shining the flashlight across the slope. For a second, nothing. Then I saw it. A figure crouched on all fours near a fallen tree, long hair hanging wet over its face, skin gray from cold or exhaustion. Bare feet pressed into the mud, toes curling like an animal preparing to spring. My heart slammed against my ribs. I took a cautious step back, ready to call out, when the figure's head snapped up with unnatural speed. It was a man, or what was left of one. His eyes were wide, too wide, like he hadn't slept in days. Dirt smeared across his cheeks, splinters embedded in his palms. He stared at me with something between terror and understanding, like he had expected me, and hated that I had come anyway. He opened his mouth, but the voice that came out wasn't a scream. It was a whisper so raw and damaged I still feel it in my bones. He's still here. I barely had time to react before movement flashed in my peripheral vision. A second figure, fast and silent, darted between the trees above the ravine. I snapped the beam toward it, catching only the glint of a bare shoulder before it vanished again. The first man scrambled backward, pressing himself against the wet bark like a child hiding from a parent. His chest heaved, breath shallow, terrified. Then the tapping started again, this time from 3 different directions. My skin crawled. Not one person. I realized with cold clarity that I hadn't discovered a wanderer. I had stepped into the edge of something organized, practiced, and very much awake. And they had been waiting for someone like me to walk in alone. I don't remember running back through the dark hallway. I don't even remember grabbing my phone. All I remember is bursting outside into the cold night, gasping like I was drowning. The cabin looked small and silent behind me, like nothing had ever happened inside it. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my phone twice before finally dialing 911. I tried explaining what I saw, what it said, but the dispatcher kept asking if someone had broken in. I couldn't answer that. I didn't know. While waiting for the police, I hid behind the woodpile, afraid the cabin door would open again and that long hand would stretch out looking for me. Every creak of the trees made me flinch. Every shift of the wind sounded like footsteps on the cabin floorboards. When the officers finally arrived, I felt relief until I saw their faces. They searched every inch of the cabin. The writing was gone. Every wall was clean. The boards had no carvings, no stains, no blood. The floorboards were intact, not a single gap showing the shadowed void below. The officer asked if I'd been drinking. I just sat there, numb, shaking my head. They escorted me out, told me to get some rest, and left. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car with the cabin lights still glowing behind me, wondering if I'd imagined everything. Until, from deep inside the wood, I heard it again. Something scratching the floorboards. I quit that post the next morning. Not because I was afraid of the forest, it had always been my home, but because I realized the forest doesn't always follow rules. There are people out there, or something pretending to be people, who know how to move unseen, how to turn silence into a trap, how to make you follow them without knowing you're being hunted. Even now, I think about that night every time I pass a trail or hear the wind shift through the trees. I replay the tapping, the whisper, the way those eyes stared at me like they could see straight through my soul. Sometimes I wonder if the man I saw crouched in the ravine was a victim or a lure. I'll never know, and that's the worst part. I still get chills when I think about how precise it all was. The stones, the circles, the flares, the footprints. Every step I took, every direction I went, it wasn't random. It was guided. I wasn't searching for someone that night. I was walking into a trap someone, or something, had been setting for a long time. And I keep asking myself the same question. What would have happened if I hadn't turned back? If I had kept moving deeper into the darkness? The forest keeps its secrets, and some of them are alive in ways you can't explain. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, waiting, arranging stones, tapping sticks, whispering into the dark, waiting for the next person who thinks they're alone. And maybe the next time, that person won't be as lucky as I was. It was late summer, and the forest was thick with heat and mosquitoes. I was stationed at a small ranger post on the edge of a remote lake, the kind of place where people come to fish or camp, but rarely stay overnight. The shift had been quiet at first, just the usual patrol calls, a few campers asking for directions, and the low hum of cicadas blending with the lake's surface. I liked it that way. Peaceful, predictable. Around midnight, I got a call on the emergency channel. A camper named Harris reported that someone was following him along the trail to his campsite. At first, I thought it was paranoia. Hikers sometimes misinterpret shadows, branches, or the natural sounds of wildlife. But the panic in his voice made my stomach twist. "They're just right there," he whispered, breathless. "I can feel them, watching me." I grabbed my flashlight, jacket, and radio, and headed out along the narrow trail toward his campsite. The trees grew close together, limbs brushing against me, branches cracking underfoot. The deeper I went, the heavier the silence became, as if the forest had swallowed all sound. Even the cicadas seemed to have stopped. Halfway to his location, I noticed something odd. Footprints in the mud. Not small or human, they were enormous, uneven, with long strides. But they weren't fresh. They seemed to fade in and out of the trail, as if whoever made them had vanished between steps. I felt my chest tighten, a premonition crawling up my spine that this wasn't just a lost camper or a prankster. Something was off. And then I heard it, the low crunch of leaves behind me, deliberate, pacing me exactly, keeping the same distance no matter how fast I walked. I didn't dare look back. Something, or someone, was following, patient, silent, and closer than I wanted to admit. I tried to pretend the footsteps behind me were just echoes of my own, but deep down I knew better. They had a different rhythm. Mine were sharp and rushed. The ones behind me were slow, careful, almost stalking. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and kept moving, not wanting to stop in the middle of that silent, suffocating trail. The trees leaned over the path like tall silhouettes, their branches twisting in ways that made them look almost human in the dark. When I finally reached Harris's campsite, I found his tent collapsed and his gear scattered everywhere. His backpack had been torn open and thrown near the fire pit, and one of his boots was lying several feet away. But he was nowhere. His radio lay in the dirt, still transmitting faint static. My heart hammered in my chest as I called his name, first softly, then louder, but nothing answered. I knelt to check the ground and spotted tracks, fresh ones, deep in the soil as if someone had been running. But they weren't leading away from the clearing. They were leading toward the treeline, where the darkness seemed unnaturally dense. I swept the flashlight across the trees, half expecting to see an animal or a person. But I saw something worse, nothing. Just the blackness, still and unbroken, as if the forest had closed itself around him. The footsteps behind me stopped. The sudden silence punched the air from my lungs. For a moment I stood frozen, feeling exposed in the middle of the clearing like prey. My mind raced. Should I radio for backup? Start searching immediately? Leave and get help? The forest seemed to tilt around me, as if urging me to stay absolutely still. Then, a faint rustling came from the dark treeline, followed by breathing. Heavy, uneven breathing. Human breathing. Someone was there, just beyond the beam of my flashlight. I lifted the light slowly, but the beam couldn't cut through the shadow. It only revealed the edge of someone's sleeve, a torn plaid shirt, half hidden behind a tree. "Harris?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The breathing stopped. No words, no movement. Just silence waiting to swallow me. My radio crackled faintly, and I nearly jumped. A voice came through, another ranger, asking for a status update. I hesitated, eyes locked on the treeline. But I knew something wasn't right, and keeping quiet wouldn't help. I reported a possible missing camper and strange activity, keeping my voice low. As soon as I finished speaking, the breathing from the treeline resumed, closer now, heavier, as if whoever was hidden there was leaning forward, listening to every word. My pulse pounded. It wasn't just Harris out here. I wasn't alone, and whoever, or whatever, was watching me had no intention of staying hidden for much longer. I stepped closer to the treeline, trying to catch a glimpse of Harris, but the darkness swallowed everything. The breathing grew louder, deeper, unnerving in its steadiness. Then a movement, a branch snapping sharply, followed by a shadow darting between two trees. My flashlight swung wildly, catching only the fleeting blur of a figure crouching low, watching, waiting. I called out again, louder this time. "Harris, come out." No answer, just the same heavy breathing and the snap of another branch. My chest tightened, and I realized that the figure wasn't alone. There were more shadows moving just beyond the light, quick and deliberate, staying at the edge of visibility. Whoever, or whatever, was out there wasn't panicking. They were controlling it, directing the chaos, letting me see only fragments, guiding my attention away from the real threat. A sudden sound behind me made me spin. My flashlight caught a flash of something slipping between trees. Then I heard it, Harris's voice, low, distant, calling for help. My stomach sank. It was not the voice of a man running lost. It was shaky, small, almost a whisper. And then I realized it was being forced. I ran toward the sound, stumbling through roots and mud, and the shadows followed, flitting from tree to tree with terrifying precision. I reached the spot where I thought I'd find him. Empty. The ground had been scuffed, dragged, but there was no sign of Harris, no footprints leading away, nothing. Just an eerie silence, broken by the faintest sound of someone, or something, heart hammering, right, flashlight shaking in my grip. A pale hand shot out from the darkness, brushing my shoulder. I froze, unable to react. The air seemed to press in on me, suffocating, and the smell hit me, damp earth, sweat, and something metallic, coppery. The shadows closed in from all sides, moving just beyond the light. I realized then I wasn't searching for a lost camper anymore. I was part of the trap. I had walked straight into it, and the forest, or whatever controlled it, was making sure I knew it. I ran blindly, adrenaline burning through me, knowing I had no idea who, or what, was still following. I don't remember exactly how I got back to the ranger post. My legs carried me without thought, slipping over roots and mud. arms swinging wildly, flashlight bouncing with every step. The forest behind me stayed silent, no pursuit, no sound, just the echo of what had been there. When I reached the cabin, I slammed the door shut and locked it, shaking so hard I could barely hold the radio. Dispatch answered immediately. I tried explaining what happened, how Harris was missing, how I had seen shadows moving deliberately, how I'd been brushed by a hand that wasn't mine, but the only response I got was calm, procedural reminders. Stay put, help is on the way. I didn't argue. I didn't want to. When the search team arrived at first light, they scoured the area, combed every inch of the forest, and finally found Harris near the far side of the lake. He was wet, shivering, and silent for long stretches, refusing to speak about what happened. His camp was untouched, no footprints besides his own, and no sign of anyone else being there. Even though Harris was alive, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself had been watching us, waiting for something we didn't understand. Every detail, the breathing, the shadows, the precise movements, had been controlled, orchestrated. Whoever, or whatever, had been out there had stayed just at the edge of our perception, teaching me a lesson I didn't want to learn. I left that post shortly after, but I still remember the way the shadows moved, the way the forest seemed alive, calculating, and patient. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear the tapping again, coming from the dark edge of the trees. Even now, months later, I replay that night in my mind more often than I should. The forest isn't just quiet, it's attentive. Every shadow, every rustle, every branch snapping is a warning if you know how to listen. I've learned that people can vanish without a trace, not because the forest is cruel, but because someone, or something, knows exactly how to use it against you. Harris never explained what happened. He still shakes when the subject comes up, staring at the trees as if they might answer him. I don't blame him. I don't blame myself either. We weren't careless. We were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes I think about the shapes I saw, the hands, the shadows, the way they moved deliberately around me, letting me glimpse them only in pieces. It wasn't random. It was patience, calculation, and control. Whoever, or whatever, it wasn't human, or at least not in the way we understand humans. And it left me with a realization I can't shake. The forest can hide things perfectly, and when it chooses, it can use its silence like a weapon. You think you're alone. You think you're safe. And that's exactly when it decides you're not. Even now, when I pass a trail or hear a twig snap in the dark, I can't help but freeze. Because some part of me knows that patience is still out there, watching, waiting. And if it ever wants to, it will make sure I, or anyone else, never walk through those trees the same way again. It was early October, the kind of night where the wind whispers through dead leaves and the forest smells like cold earth and decay. I was on patrol near an abandoned logging site, a stretch of land where the trees had been clear-cut decades ago, leaving jagged stumps and twisted roots. Most people avoided it, even in daylight. I liked it because it was quiet, predictable. Or so I thought. That night, I was walking the perimeter alone, checking on a few old trail markers and the remains of what had once been a ranger checkpoint. The wind shifted and carried a faint sound toward me, like someone humming, low and deliberate, just at the edge of hearing. I paused. The forest was supposed to be empty. No campers. No hikers. No one. I shook it off and kept moving, flashlight cutting swaths through the darkness. But then I heard it again, soft, deliberate footsteps behind me. They didn't match mine. Slower. Heavier. And they stopped when I stopped, started when I started, as if mirroring me, testing me. My pulse spiked. I spun around, flashlight sweeping the black trunks, but there was nothing. I should have left. Any rational person would have. But curiosity, the instinct to investigate, kept me moving toward the source. That's when I noticed something impossible. A series of footprints in the wet soil that didn't belong to me, or any human I knew. Bare, large, dragging slightly, like whoever left them wasn't walking, but gliding. They led deeper into the logging site, toward the remains of a collapsed shed. Something was waiting there. I stepped closer, heart hammering, and the humming stopped. Complete silence. And that's when I realized I was completely alone, or maybe I wasn't. I approached the collapsed shed slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. Every instinct screamed to turn around, but something, a pull I couldn't explain, kept me moving forward. The ground was littered with broken boards, jagged metal, and the remnants of old tools. The footprints led right up to the shed, then stopped abruptly at the edge of its shadow. No sign of whoever, or whatever, had made them. I called out softly, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded tiny, swallowed by the stillness of the night. For a moment, nothing was answered. Then, from deep inside the darkness, I heard a low chuckle. Human, unmistakably human, but strained, hollow, almost inhuman in its cadence. My stomach dropped. I circled the shed, flashlight sweeping across broken planks and rusty nails. That's when I noticed writing scratched into one of the beams. Small letters, deep grooves, jagged. "You shouldn't be here." My chest tightened. Whoever wrote it knew I was coming, knew I'd follow the trail. Then movement, fast, almost imperceptible, in the corner of my vision. I snapped the flashlight toward it and saw a figure crouched low, pressed against the ground like it was trying to merge with the shadows. It was thin, long-limbed, and its head jerked sharply as if tracking me. The blood drained from my face. I realized I had been watching the entire time. Every step, every pause, every thought, it was known. The wind picked up suddenly, rattling the broken roof panels. I heard whispers, indistinct, just at the edge of hearing, circling around me. The figure didn't move closer, not yet. It let me see it, let me know it was there, and I felt the primal terror of being hunted, studied, toyed with. I tried calling dispatch on the radio, my voice shaking, but only a static answer. Every instinct screamed to run, but where could I go? The forest surrounded me. The logging site was maze-like, and I could hear faint snapping branches in the distance. Someone was out there, moving silently but always watching. I backed away from the shed, flashlight trembling, heart pounding, realizing that I wasn't following the figure. It was leading me. And whatever it was, it had been waiting for someone like me for a long time. The figure finally moved. Not toward me, but sideways, dragging itself along the ground with unnatural smoothness. My flashlight caught its face for half a second, and I almost dropped the light. Eyes wide, unblinking, skin stretched thin and pale, like someone who hadn't seen sunlight in years. Its mouth twitched into something that could barely be called a smile. It whispered something I couldn't understand, a breathy hiss in a language that didn't belong in any human throat. The whisper was close, too close, though the figure was several feet away. I stepped back, pulse hammering, but the dirt behind me shifted. Another shape rose from the ground, quiet, slow, like it had been lying there waiting. Two of them. How long had they been watching me? The radio on my hip crackled suddenly, and through the static I heard a voice, my supervisor's, calling my name. Relief shot through me, but before I could respond, a dirty hand clamped over the radio and crushed it against my side. I spun, flashlight swinging wildly, but no one was there, just the echoing crunch of leaves as both figures began to move toward me. Not rushing, not frantic, slow, deliberate, enjoying the fear. I tried to run, but the logging site was a maze of half-rotted timber and pits where roots had been torn out years ago. I stumbled, hitting the ground hard, the flashlight skittering away. The beam spun wildly across the clearing, cutting through the dark long enough for me to see both figures advancing. Their steps were too smooth, too gliding, like their joints worked differently from mine. One leaned close enough that I could hear its breath, slow, congested, like lungs filled with fluid. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a broken board, and swung as hard as I could. The wood cracked against something soft, and the figure recoiled with a low hiss. I scrambled up and ran, not caring where, just moving, tearing through branches and mud, desperate for any sound that wasn't the whispering and the soft glide of pursuit behind me. That night, I wasn't a ranger. I was prey. I ran until the forest opened onto the old service road, lungs burning, legs screaming, flashlight swinging wildly. The shadows didn't follow me onto the open ground, but I didn't slow down. I didn't stop until the ranger truck's headlights cut through the darkness. Explaining everything. Relief hit me like footprints, the whispers, the figures that moved like shadows, but the officers' faces didn't change. They searched the logging site for hours the next morning. Nothing. No footprints besides my own. No signs of anyone hiding. No evidence of the figures I had seen. Nothing to suggest they had ever existed. Harris's camp had been untouched for years. Nobody had been near it. The night left a weight in my chest that didn't go away. My hands shook for days, and I replayed every sound, every shadow, every glint of light, trying to convince myself it was stress, fatigue, or imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Someone, or something, had been there studying me, testing me, waiting for me to follow. Even now, months later, I avoid that part of the park. I check every trail marker twice. I never go alone. And sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear I hear soft gliding steps in the distance, and the faintest whisper in my ear telling me I'm too close. Some places in the forest aren't haunted by ghosts. They're haunted by patience. I still think about that night almost every time I step into the forest. Not because I fear the wildlife, or the uneven trails, or the isolation, but because of them. Those figures weren't animals, they weren't lost hikers. They were patient. They watched, they studied, they guided without touching, without making a sound beyond what I could barely notice. The thing that chills me the most is how deliberate it all was. Every step I took, every pause I made was anticipated. The trails, the shed, the sounds, they were all traps, arranged precisely to pull me in and test me. And I followed willingly, thinking I was doing my job. I wasn't. I was walking into their design. Harris never returned to that section of the park. He stayed far away, refusing to speak about what he saw. Me? I left the post. I can't bring myself back there, even years later. The forest isn't just quiet or dark. Some parts are patient and waiting, watching. Sometimes I wonder, if I had hesitated, if I had ignored the first sound, the first set of footprints, would they have let me go at all? Or was I always meant to be their next lesson, a reminder that the forest has its own rules, rules that aren't written and aren't kind. And I don't think it's over. I know they're still out there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for someone else to walk alone, following the trail, thinking they're safe. And that thought keeps me awake at night. It was the middle of winter, and the wind had picked up across the ridges, carrying ice and snow into the thick pines. I was on patrol near the high-altitude trails, in a part of the park where few hikers ever went. The kind of place where the cold seeps into your bones, and the silence is so deep it feels like the forest is holding its breath. That night, the emergency channel crackled with a call from a solo skier, a young man named Eric. He'd been separated from his group hours earlier and reported seeing someone, or something, following him along the ridge trail. His voice was shaking, breath ragged. "I can see them," he said. "They're keeping their distance, but they're there." I geared up, taking extra layers and my flashlight, and headed out along the snowy trail. The snow crunched under my boots, echoing strangely in the emptiness. Each shadow looked like a figure, each gust of wind a whisper. It didn't take long for me to realize this part of the forest had a strange quality. Everything sound-wise was amplified, but sight seemed muffled. The trees hung low with snow, their trunks thick, bending the moonlight into shapes that didn't make sense. About 20 minutes in, I noticed footprints, large, wide, and uneven. They weren't human, at least not entirely. Each step seemed deliberate, and the trail they created led slightly off the marked path, toward a thicket of evergreens where visibility was nearly zero. Something about the spacing and depth told me the maker knew exactly how to move silently, without breaking the snow's crust, while still leaving signs for someone to follow. And then I heard it, soft, slow breathing, coming from just beyond the line of trees. I froze, heart hammering, realizing that the forest wasn't empty. Something was out there, waiting, watching. I crouched behind a fallen pine, careful not to disturb the snow, and tried to get a better look. The breathing continued, slow, controlled, steady. Whoever it was wasn't panicking. They were patient, letting me see only what they wanted me to see. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my training as a ranger, and some foolish sense of duty, kept me moving forward. The footprints led toward a small clearing where the snow was unusually clean, almost unnaturally so. There were no recent animal tracks, no broken branches, just a flat, empty patch surrounded by pines. I stepped into the clearing and froze. In the center, a single ski pole had been stabbed into the snow upright, perfectly straight. Beside it, a shallow depression, like someone had been kneeling there, marred the surface. I knelt to inspect it, heart thumping. The snow beneath had been compressed carefully, leaving no signs of dragging. Whoever had been there had moved deliberately, leaving only the barest hint that someone, or something, had been in that spot. Then I heard a snap behind me, soft but deliberate, followed by the crunch of snow. I swung the flashlight toward the sound and caught a glimpse of movement, a figure ducking between the trees. Pale, hunched, and impossibly still, it seemed to melt into the darkness. I called out, "Hey, who's there?" No answer, just the sound of snow shifting under some invisible weight. I checked my radio, dead. Not static, just dead. The cold made it hard to think clearly, but I knew I wasn't alone. The figure was guiding me, herding me deeper into the forest. Each step I took, I realized, was being watched, anticipated, even manipulated. Suddenly, I saw more footprints leading off to the right, deeper into thicker trees where visibility was nearly zero. They weren't human, at least not entirely, but they were arranged in a way that suggested someone wanted me to follow them. And like a fool, I did. The further I went, the heavier the silence became. Even the wind seemed to pause, the forest holding its breath. And then I heard Eric's voice on the radio, far away, distorted and terrified. "I see them, they're around me, they're watching." My stomach sank. I realized then that this wasn't just a lost skier. This was something waiting, patient, and far more intelligent than anything I'd encountered before. Eric's voice cut in again, distant and broken, as if the radio were underwater. "They're close. I can't move." Then only a faint rasping sound, like someone struggling to breathe. I broke into a run, following the footprints through the narrowing corridor of trees. The snow whipped against my face, branches scraping my jacket as I pushed deeper into the forest. The trees crowded around me, turning the world into a funnel of blackness. Eric's backpack hanging from a broken branch, the straps torn unevenly. The ground beneath was disturbed, but not in the way someone falling would leave marks. There were deep knee impressions, as if he'd been forced down or knelt willingly. Another pair of tracks circled around him, slowly, methodically, calculating. My flashlight beam swept left, and I froze. At the edge of the tree line, a figure stood completely still, half hidden in shadow. Tall, too tall, shoulders hunched, head cocked sharply to one side as if studying me. Its breath was visible in the icy air, slow, controlled, measured. I stepped forward, hand instinctively reaching toward the emergency flare on my belt. The figure stepped back, disappearing behind a trunk with unnerving smoothness, like it pivoted without actually turning. I heard soft crunches, two more figures moving, closing in, forming a half circle around me. Then Eric screamed. Not from pain, something far worse. Pure terror, short and sudden, as though someone had grabbed the sound out of his throat. I spun toward the noise and caught a flash of movement, his leg, his boot, dragged into the snow behind a fallen tree. I lunged forward, but something collided with me from the side, hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I hit the ground, vision blurring, snow filling my mouth and nose. I scrambled to my feet just as one of the figures leaned close, so close that I could see the wet, ashen skin stretched tight across its skull. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, reflecting my flashlight like glass marbles. It didn't attack. I just watched it, waiting, and that was somehow far worse. I don't remember how I got out. Some part of me kept running blindly, tripping over roots and fallen branches, snow crunching under frantic boots. The trees finally thinned, giving way to the service road. I collapsed against the guardrail, gasping, shaking, my flashlight still pointing into the dark forest. The radio finally crackled to life. Dispatch's voice sounded distant and muffled, asking what happened. I couldn't speak at first. My words came out broken, disjointed. I reported Eric missing, the footprints, the shadows, the strange, deliberate movements, but the words felt hollow. They searched the area for hours the next morning. Nothing. No footprints besides mine. No signs of Eric. No evidence of anything unusual. When I returned later, with a team and in daylight, the forest looked harmless. The snow had melted, leaving only tracks from animals and my own boots. No sign of the figures. No traces of Eric. I kept replaying the night in my mind. The whispering breaths, the circling figures, the way the forest seemed alive, orchestrating everything. Even now, months later, I avoid that trail. I refuse to patrol it alone. And when the wind carries just right, I swear I can hear soft crunching in the snow, deliberate and patient, as if someone or something is watching, waiting. The forest doesn't forget. And sometimes I wonder if it ever lets go. That night changed me in ways I can't fully explain. I was trained to handle emergencies, to think logically under pressure, but nothing prepared me for something patient, intelligent, and unseen guiding every step I took. The forest didn't just hide these figures. It allowed them to orchestrate the hunt, using silence, snow, and shadows as weapons. Eric was never found. They searched for days, combed the ridges, but he had vanished as if the snow had swallowed him whole. Some part of me thinks he's still out there, caught in the same quiet patience I glimpsed that night. And some part of me knows it could have been me. Even now, when I walk near the high ridges or hear the wind shift through pines, I feel eyes on me. I notice footprints where none should be. I hear soft, deliberate crunches in the snow that stop when I stop. I've learned that some places in the forest aren't just dangerous, they're intelligent. They test you, toy with you, and if you follow their rules too closely, you might never leave. I don't tell anyone about it. Most wouldn't believe me anyway. But I can't shake the thought. The forest is patient and waiting. It doesn't forget, and someday it will find someone else who thinks they're alone, and it will make them part of its game, just as close, just as calculated as it almost did with me. And that realization, that quiet, deliberate patience, haunts me every time I close my eyes at night.